mute my lunch here.
All right, welcome everybody once again to the Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. This is our April session, and this month we have Dave Ramsey, who's going to be talking to us about FMPerception and FMComparison, and I'm going to turn it right over to Dave. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks. By the way, this is the March session, right?
Yeah, did I say April? Or
yes.
What did I say? I was setting up for the April already for next month.
Let me see here. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Ramsey.
Hi.
Let me.
That's funny. You don't look like Dave Ramsey.
This is normally the part where I start doing my Dave Ramsey impression, which is.
He's in that state across the river.
I gotta say, I don't do a bad Dave Ramsey impression, but okay. Can everybody see that?
Yep. We can.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, we'll leave it there. It has me kind of looking off from where the camera is, but I'll survive. So hi, here today to talk about FMPerception, and we're also going to spend some time on FMComparison. I'm going to try not to use the entire allotted time so that we've got time for questions and things like that, and we'll leave it up to the group as to whether we want to intersperse those between the two segments or not. But FMPerception is a Mac and Windows tool that can give you a lot of intelligence on what's going on inside a system. The more complex the system, the more helpful it is. This is me. I write a lot of code. I play around in a lot of languages, but that's really all this says. So, the core element to FMPerception ends up being its speed. And there are two things that make it fast. The first is native code. This is not a FileMaker-based analysis tool like Base Elements or Inspector Pro or Crosscheck. This is Swift on Mac OS and C# from the ground up on Windows. So that gives us some performance advantages. The other thing that makes it fast is that it uses progressive analysis. So if you dump all your data into a FileMaker-based tool, the first thing that it has to do is import all of that data. And it has to have everything so that when you go searching, what you're searching for is already there. FMPerception waits for you to tell it what you're interested in, and then it parses just that part of the XML to be able to answer your question. And so it can get those answers very quickly. It's actually faster to open an XML DDR in FMPerception than it is to export and open the HTML DDR. Because when FileMaker is doing the HTML DDR, they actually export the XML DDR and then run it through XSLT to turn it into HTML. So the process for FMPerception to open that XML is faster than the process for FileMaker to filter all of the XML through the XSLT and make a different format. So speed's nice and all, but what does that really net you? Getting back your time is valuable, tightening up your cycle. But for me, it's a big issue of confidence, because if the XML that I'm working with can be this quick, then I will work with the latest XML. I won't use yesterday's DDR or last week's DDR. I'll use the DDR from 2 minutes ago, because it just takes a couple minutes to export, open it right up, and I'm back working on it. So Yeah. Generally, as quickly as possible, I try and get out of slides and get ready to actually looking at the software. And I just stopped my share, and I didn't mean to do that. Hide that, and where is Zoom? Here we go. Start share. So let's open a DDR. I have here a current DDR folder that I just export things to. And on this machine, I've actually got FMPerception set up as the default opener for .xml files. So I can just double click on the summary.xml and it opens an FMPerception. And the import process is done. It's done. Now, what has that gotten us? And the answer is not a whole heck of a lot, because it's waiting for us to tell it what we're interested in. I'm sorry, is it not sharing?
It is not.
No.
There you go. Now it's there.
You'd think I'd have figured out how to use Zoom by now. You'd think. Okay, let's try this again, but you can actually see it happen this time. I can double click on this summary.xml file and it opens an FMPerception and the import process is done. That's all the prep time it needs to start working with your latest XML. So basically what's done is it's loaded all of that XML into RAM and then waits. So now when I start saying things like, okay, FM starting point solution, and I use starting point generally in demos because everybody can get access to it. You can run your own tests with the software and see that you can reproduce the things that I'm showing you. And it's a sufficiently complex system. If I say tables, until now, it actually hasn't loaded any of the table XML. But when I click, it loads the table XML. That's all it took. But note that it also got things like the number of fields that are in each table and such like that, which it involves it actually looking at the field level. That number just isn't present. I have to total them up. And so I can pick a particular table, let's say the projects table, and get a list of all the fields in that table. And there you go. Here's the fields. Now, if I want to, let's see here. I need, what was that field called? Use a filter. I want the status field. Couldn't remember if it was status or project status. There's the status field, and I want to know what layouts it's on. Now, until this time, it hasn't loaded any of the layout data. But I double click there, and here are the 23 places that that field exists on a layout. So if I need to make sure that all of these fields that appear on data entry layouts are tied to the correct drop-down list, let's see here. So there is the drop-down, the display type, and there is the value list that's tied to it. There we go. I just quickly kind of built myself a little interface to show me exactly what I need to see to answer this question. And so I can see, okay, well, here's, these don't have drop-downs assigned at all. These do have drop-downs, and I see that we've actually got a couple of different value lists that are being applied there. I love FileMaker's table view for looking at large chunks of data, quickly sorting it, and looking for aberrations. This entire section of FMPerception was inspired by the FileMaker table view and how much I like it for doing that, exactly this kind of stuff. Show me the pattern and then show me where the pattern is broken. And it's fast. So if this is all I need, this is the answer that I need right now, that's all it took to get it. And I can go back to work. This is what FMPerception is optimized for, is that core usage loop. I'm working on a system. I have a question about the system. I export a clean DDR right then, open it in FMPerception, get the answer to my question, and get back to work. It's not optimized for we're getting ready to do a 6-month-long migration project, and I need to plan the thing out and organize it and take notes and whatever. There are other tools that do that well. FMPerception is the tool that I'm going to use every day during the project to make sure that I'm keeping up on what's changing, what's happening with the system, especially if you're working with multiple developers and things like that. I may not have made one of these layouts. There's no way for me to know that this field is on this layout because I didn't make that layout. So depending upon your personal knowledge, we've all screwed it up. We've all done it. So I recommend getting the actual answer and going on from there. So topic-wise, lots of different things in here we can look at. We can look at the tables and through there get the fields, or we can look at all the fields flat. Here's all the fields, look at all the field comments across all the tables right there. Which ones are unstored calculations? I can look there, and here's the calculation definition. Now, if I wanted to do some searches, some analysis on that to see which of these are simple and which of these are complex, I can just dump this out to use everybody's favorite tool for doing data analysis, FileMaker. So you just go to export results to CSV, and that will generate a CSV of whatever is here, with the current filter applied, with the current column ordering, with the current sorts applied. Whatever you see here is what gets spit out. And you can just drop that CSV onto FileMaker and it will make a table for you. I didn't want to dirty FMPerception up, building in, dirty's the wrong word. It was going to take a ton of work to give you a tiny sliver of what FileMaker can already do, and we already all know how to do it. If you have a bunch of data and you have FileMaker, you have a solved problem. So you can use FMPerception to surface that data for you and move on from there. How many of you have ever done a data migration between two versions of a system and had to make sure that the serialization, the next serial value for each of the fields was properly updated after the migration?
Yep.
This list is right there for that. This is a list of every serialized field in the system, what table it's on, and right here is the next serial value. Right there. I can get this from the XML in about 4 seconds. Export this to CSV, pull it into FileMaker, add some checkboxes, add a sign off, add a confirmation, whatever you need to do for your process. Done. Back to work. You can look at folders, or I'm sorry, layouts, either in their folders, so we can look at just a particular group of layouts at a time, or we can look at all the layouts as a flat group, just all pulled out of their folders. And I can look at things like how many layout objects are there. Here we go. Here is our busiest layout. Drill into that layout, and here are all the layout objects on the layout. Every button, field, rectangle, tab panel, text labels, all of it. So that I can look and see things like which of the things on this layout are surfacing an unstored calculation. So when this layout is rendered, what field level unstored calculations are getting calculated? Right here. At least as far as to place them on the layout. If, on the other hand, I need to know about things like conditional formatting and hide conditions and calculated button labels and things like that, we can look here and so on that layout, instead of looking at the layout objects, I can look at the calculations. And here are the 337 calculations that can run on this one layout, basically every time we look at it. Here's all the busyness. Lots more fun stuff in there, but I want to keep going because if I get bogged down, I'll spend 3 hours on this conversation and everybody will cry. Scripts we can do in the folders as well, or we can do those flat. So here is my longest script, 270 steps. 247 of them are active, 23 of them have been deactivated, and there are 32 comment lines. So let's look at here. What did I want to see? This one. This is a 166 line script. Only 37 of the steps are active. There are 129 deactivated steps in this script. Now, if it's a junior developer who's brought this to me, I'm going to hand it back and ask them to do a little more work there. There's another one here. This is a 122 line script with exactly one comment in it. Again, junior developer, we got to have a conversation about this. We can look at things as far as all the steps in the scripts. We've got steps flat, but I don't generally recommend that you look here because this is just a humongous mess of data. We've actually got basically, think of it as like a FileMaker sub-summary report for standard script steps. Here's all the standard FileMaker script steps that are in this system and how many times each is used. So if I want to know the number of times we use the open URL script step, I can drill in, and here are these 64 places. And note that it's only used in 2 steps, 2 actual script steps. Everything else in this system is doing it directly off of a button with no script. And this is why I like standard script steps over steps, because steps will tell you steps in scripts, but that would only find you these 2. I want the other 62. And those are uses of a standard script step that are not in a script step, if that makes sense. Here's the same thing for standard FileMaker functions. So if you need to know get application version, here are the 39 places that it is used. Custom functions. Here's all the custom functions. For these, we can actually calculate the uses right off the bat, so I can see which of my custom functions are not being called from anywhere, or at least anywhere obvious. They might be used in an evaluate function or something like that. So be careful about using that to say, nope, not used. But I can do some fun stuff here, like some of these scripts are...
Dave, may I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you were talking about something that wouldn't show up because it was in an evaluate. Is that because is that because it's like quoted and is a string instead of a...
Sure.
Is that what it is?
There's even the possibility that you could write a calculation and put it in a field. You've seen people who have made custom function libraries that are actually in a table. Well, the DDR doesn't know any of the records.
Okay.
So those records could be evaluating a calculation string that references that thing. I'll get further into that conversation when we get into unreferenced objects, a little further down the list. But here we go. So this is this @@.param, which is part of the SQL Sugar collection of custom functions. And I can see that, how do I, oh, there we go. Much better. It calls these 2 functions, one of which is itself. And because it also is called by these 2 functions. So if you try and move this function from one FileMaker system to another FileMaker system, you're going to break it because it depends on other FileMaker custom functions. So if you don't move them all as a group, FileMaker is going to quote the or comment out the definition of the custom function and break it on you. And so that's what the function family is for. If I click there, FMPerception spiders up and down the custom function call chain to find every custom function that has to move as a unit, not based upon name, but based upon actual references. So if these 4 custom functions don't move together, definitions break. Now, in a perfect world, I'd really like to just like grab these and throw them into FileMaker, and we can. You can select them all, hit copy for FileMaker, paste them directly into the FileMaker database, and they'll work, and none of the definitions will break because you got the entire family. FMPerception can do this with anything that FileMaker supports copy and paste for. So tables, fields, scripts, script steps, layout objects, custom functions, value lists, and the 3 levels of access privileges that we can now copy and paste. So you can use any of your old DDRs as copy decks for future systems. That one's fun. Here's all the global variables in the system and the number of times each one is used. And if you want to look at your system and find some things that you did funky, we've got $ window underscore top and $ window top with different capitalization as well. There's also things here where we can see that this window underscore name actually appears in 2 different case variants, one all lowercase and one kind of camel case with underscore. So 5 times it appears this way, 1 time it appears this way. I can drill in, and these are the 6 places that this appears. So you want to chase down that problem of somewhere between point A and point Z, this global variable got its value stomped on. What are all the places in this system that talk to it or read from it? I need to know. And FMPerception can tell you. So let's see, relationships, predicates. If you want to see every place in the system where you did a cross join, right here in the actual relationships, because this is 1 row per predicate in a relationship. So we can isolate each of those individual joined fields. Let's see here, accounts, privilege sets, extended privileges. Let's look at themes.
I have a quick question, Dave.
Yeah, go for it.
I downloaded the 14-day trial and opened it up, and I'm trying to follow along with you on some of this stuff. I'm on Windows. It doesn't look like yours does. Like all the selections are on the left instead of across the top. Is that
right?
So that's a Windows thing.
It's a Windows thing, or kind of a Windows thing. Let's look at it this way. This is a Mac thing.
Right. Replicates the Finder.
UI, yeah. Well, this UI object is actually included as part of like Xcode. It's built into Cocoa. Windows doesn't have one. There are people who have made their own, and I attempted to work with some of those and didn't like any of them. They were terrible. And I found that for the most part, the Windows users are used to seeing the tree view. That's what you're getting on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
You can actually get that in the Mac version if you really want it, but particularly for demo purposes, I find this much more helpful.
Yeah.
The other thing that you could do is you can actually ignore it entirely. Close that off, shrink it down, and just look here. So I don't need the rest of that UI if I don't want to. This is also really good if you're working on a MacBook Air or something else with a really small screen.
Right.
If I can just double click here, tables, projects, fields, it remembered my status filter, and then I want to say, okay, find me every place where this field is used. And just double clicks will do it. And I can hit this to go back up. You don't need to use the tree navigator at all if you don't want to.
Okay.
Dave, I have a question.
Yeah.
When when you were early on and you first went into fields, and I believe it says flat there in the third column, when your product brings them in, are they brought in creation order, or how are they presented there? Is that alphabetical?
They are presented
initially, that is.
Initially, there is a preference in the navigation section where it will sort them alphabetically. So basically almost everything is sorted alphabetically except for layouts and scripts, because layouts and scripts, very often we don't look at them in name order. We look at them not in creation order, in the order we put them in. Very often fields aren't like that. However, if you're one of those people for whom they are, you can just turn that off so that it doesn't do that anymore. Or basically every list has an ordinal column all the way over on the right. And if we sort by the ordinal, this is the order that the data came in from the DDR, which will be, at least on fields, the order that it appears when you're in defined fields.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you've made your fields in a custom order, they will be in the ordinal order, and you want to turn off that sort everything alphabetically. Most of the users weren't doing that, and so they wanted it to default to sorting by name almost everywhere. So that's what the default is set up to be.
Thank you.
Sure thing. So themes. So here are our themes. Hey, there's that classic theme we were talking about, Ron. The number of layouts. This might actually help you chase down where that thing is coming from. So the number of layouts that this theme is applied to, the number of objects to which styles have been applied, and then the number of objects that had this theme applied but then had it overwritten. So adjusted beyond or outside the theme. And so I can go in and let's drill in here and let's look at the custom styles that we created. And here is the layout objects that use that. And wow, we got a bunch of styles here that probably aren't being used. Now, I got to talk about layout part styles. You can make style sheets for layout parts. FileMaker doesn't tell me about them in the DDR, so I can't tell you if they're being used. There's actually a column here that flags layout part styles to differentiate, a 0 from a blank. We had a developer who went through and looked at all the things that said 0 and just deleted them from the system. And that can be dangerous. And in this particular case, it was. There are lots of ways to use things that we can't see. Let's talk about that for unreferenced objects. So if I want to look at custom functions that are unreferenced, here are the custom functions that are unreferenced. Two things to deal with here. One, unreferenced does not mean unused. Not necessarily. There are all sorts of ways between evaluate, and if you're looking at things like layouts or scripts, they can be called from external systems through APIs, through AppleScript, through web stuff. However, those things can be talked to in your system without leaving any trace in the DDR that it's happening. So be cautious about using these lists as something that you can just delete everything. Okay, that can be, let's call that counterproductive, shall we? The second thing to mention is that hunting down unreferenced objects has a tendency to be a circular process. And by that, I mean, if I know this system and I know that all of these custom functions are not being used anywhere through evaluate or anything like that, and I delete them all, if I run another DDR and come back here, I will probably see new unreferenced custom functions, because they are custom functions that are only referenced by these custom functions. So you delete something, but that was the last link to this. So now this one's unreferenced. So you delete that, but that was the last link to something else. And now you delete that. The good news is FMPerception is great for that, because you can cycle through that, do a bunch of deletions, run another DDR, look at the XML, and just keep doing it until you've gotten to whatever state that you wanted to get to. I jumped over this text search. I want to go back to it, but we stumbled into the unreferenced versus unused discussion, and I always want to call attention to that. So this is freeform text search across the entire thing. And this is some people's first stop, but I generally recommend it as kind of the catch-all. If you can find it someplace else, it will be faster that way. But let's say that, well, this was one that Todd Geist started using in Geist Interactive and then in Proof+Geist, is they have certain keywords that they can insert into their systems to leave notes for future developers. So I can do something like this and search for the word "do not release" as one word. And they can just tag this in. This is a text object on a layout. This is in some script steps. This is a comment on a status field, or yeah, a comment on a field definition. You can just leave this note in there. So if there's something that you need to make sure that you fix before you promote dev to prod or something like that, you can note them. There's so many different ways in FileMaker to leave yourself a little note so that you can use FMPerception to find it, even when it's not a system that you're working on a daily basis. Really, really helpful, particularly in teams. I highly recommend it. Let's see here. So unreferenced objects, indirection, broken references. Remember when I showed you all the calculations that were on a particular layout? This is all the calculations in the entire system. Every place where FileMaker will let you enter a calculation, FMPerception surfaces all 13,939 calculations. And so I can look in here and say, well, what's my longest one? Well, this is a 28,000 character calculation. The good news is it's in a custom function. It's kind of encapsulated. I'll let that one pass. If that was in a field definition, I'd probably want to tackle that and do something with it. There's a couple of fun things that we can do here. One of them is, have you ever, well, like that situation with the custom function where you migrate it over and the whole calculation definition gets commented out? There's a specific filter for that in FMPerception, and that's this all comment column. And you see there's two different symbols there. This one is a hide condition that got commented out. The whole thing is commented. Not necessarily a problem, but I want to notify you about it, because that may have been done by FileMaker without your knowledge. It doesn't give you an error message when it does that. It just fixes it for you. Now, this red one is slightly different. And this is what happens when you've got, the place that I've most noticed it is in hide conditions, but I believe it can happen elsewhere, where you had a hide condition calculation, and then you went to comment it out. And FileMaker said, that's not acceptable here. Oh, wait, I bet you meant this to be a string. And so you tried to comment it out, and FileMaker wrapped it in double quotes. So follow along with me here. It's a hide condition, and you tried to comment it out, which means it would always be false. But FileMaker wrapped it in double quotes, which makes a non-empty string, which is always true. And so that object disappears forever. Really tough to chase these down. But basically, it's looking for double quotes surrounding something that is just a comment. It is possible to need that, but 9 times out of 10, that's a problem in your system. How about, which of my calculations are going through sorted relationships? It's looking from the calculation definition through the relationship graph to look in the relationship definitions to see which of them are sorted. Here is how many remote TOs this calculation references at minimum. Bear in mind that things like scripts can run from any context. And so if it runs from one place, it may be 1 step away to get the value. And if it runs from another place, it may be 20 steps away to get the value. But this will at least give you some hints as to where that complexity is. I'm going to jump forward here to the report card. And the report card was very heavily influenced by my own experience as a developer. And a very common situation that I got into was a customer wants me to talk to them about working on their system, and I've never seen their system before. So how long does it take me to figure out what kind of system is this? How complicated is it? And so that's what the report card is designed to do. And this really should be wrapping up any second now. It is the bottom thing on the list in the section of slower queries because it is the slowest query because it runs every query above it and aggregates the results. And so we can see here all the files in this solution, how many tables there are, is there any ESS going on? How many fields are there? You know, if this is an averaging out to, well, I didn't mean to go. If this is averaging out to 2,000 fields per table, that tells me something about the design of that system. It also tells me something about how difficult it's going to be to support it. You know, if the table occurrence count matches the table count, I know something about the complexity of this system. I know something about the kinds of developers that were working on it. Are they using global fields? Are they using container fields? Sneaky place to store massive quantities of data and make a database really huge is in container fields. Are they still using repeating fields? I'm not saying this is bad. There's perfectly valid uses in modern FileMaker for repeating fields. They're just not what people used to use them for. And so I want to make sure you're aware that they exist in the system. Now, everything on this list I thought was of interest, but there's also a little note on the mouse over that just gives you a little more context for why I think this was an interesting number. Stored calculation fields will bloat the size of the system. Unstored calculations slow it down. Which way do we want to go? How do we want to deal with that? Let's see here. What else is good? Popovers. Popovers are awesome, but they're also a really sneaky way to hide functionality because the entire popover view disappears until that button is clicked on, even in layout mode. And so you can look through a system and it looks fairly simple. And then you actually dig into the system and you realize that each screen has 5 popovers. Okay, now we've got a problem because there's actually 5 times as much layout real estate as I had estimated when we were first going into it. Here is single step buttons. So these are buttons that do something other than perform script. These are the bane of my existence, why I called them out. This was one that Wim de Kort requested, which is one of the things that he looks at is layouts with more than one portal. He finds performance problems, and he just has a tendency to distrust the design of any screen with more than one portal. I don't know if I universally agree with him on that, but that's his metric, and he really wanted it there, and I could give it to him. So he requested it, and we did it. See, scripts, the longest script. The longest script is 5 steps. I know something about that system. Are there any comments? Did they use white space? This particular system, 15, 16% of the steps are white space. Good. Somebody was spacing some stuff out and organizing it. Did they make any folders? Or is it just one big pile of things? Let's see here, global variables. So the total number of global variables in the system, how many of them have inconsistent case? And then it's not so much a question of how many global variables there are, but where they touch. So here's the thing here. 50% of the scripts in this system read from or write to global variables, which tells me that before I can work on this customer's scripts, I have to understand their global variable system. There's all sorts of state and functionality that's being stored in those global variables, and I need to understand that before I touch anything in the scripts, or I'm going to break something. If it's 1%, we'll worry about that when it happens. 50%, you're going to have to spend some time learning about the global variables first. Let's see here. Okay, I like this section. So, wait, is it that section? No, here, the extended privileges. So I want to know, can anybody get into this system via ODBC or JDBC? Well, there's a particular extended privilege for that. But the extended privilege is tied to privilege sets. Could be any number of privilege sets, some of which may or may not be tied to accounts. Some of those accounts may or may not be active. And so this actually flattens that entire graph for you and says there is one account that is tied to a privilege set that is tied to the ODBC, JDBC extended privilege that is active. It has to be a live account that's tied to that extended privilege. So you can very quickly here see, okay, are they getting into this system via other mechanisms? Are they using APIs? Are they using PHP? Is there REST stuff going on? Is there AppleScript and ActiveX, active URL script stuff? All of that can take quite a while to figure out what's going on in a system without digging in here. Themes, unreferenced objects, broken references, indirection sources. So lots of data here. This was designed for, I'm getting ready to sit down with a customer. I've never seen their system. I've got 15 minutes before the meeting. Can I get them to send me a DDR? If I can get the DDR, I have all of this information in front of me, and this gives me a lot of information for informing the discussions I'm going to have, understanding the complexity of the system, and things like that. This does not assign letter grades or red marks to your system. That's not what this is about. This is about just surfacing large numbers of statistics so that you can A, know them in a single point in time, and B, look at them over history if you want to.
And you can save it.
Yes. You can do export results HTML content. There are 2 places in the system where that FileMaker table view that I love so much gets replaced by something more elaborate. This is one of them, and I can't believe I skipped the other one. I'm going to have to go back and get it. This is one of them. So if you want to save it out as an HTML file, export results HTML content, you get a single encapsulated web page that has all of this. Let me instead, here's the other place, and it's in scripts. And let's look at the print page setup script, little 4-line script. Nothing big, but I need to know how this fits into the overall ecosystem. And so I can use the call chain diagram. And this shows me that this is a leaf script. It doesn't call anything, Everything that it is connected to is upstream from it. But here are all the scripts. And all of these things are navigable. So if I actually want to say, okay, let me redraw this diagram, but do it from the perspective of save PDF to desktop, I click on it, do the call chain diagram again, and this is the same diagram from this other perspective. I spent too many hours, days, weeks of my life in 20 years as a FileMaker developer, taking that on open triggered script and tracing every script that it calls and every script that it calls and every script that it calls and every script that those call. Too many times drawing those diagrams, this does the diagram for me. And so you can spit this out to HTML. If you spit it out to HTML, it's not navigable anymore. This isn't an encapsulated system, but you can still have that if you want to print it from Safari or Edge or whatever like that.
I gotta say, I absolutely love this. Just playing with it here, following along. Looking at this, I already found a reference to a subscript that was duplicated, and I went in and fixed it that quick. Yep, I love it.
And the real fun is after you've fixed that, if you really want to, you can spit out the DDR again, reopen it in FMPerception, and confirm that the thing was fixed.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, okay, I fixed all the things I found, they must be fixed now. Because I've had too many spots where there was a script that was calling this thing that it shouldn't have, but it turns out that further down in the script, it was calling it again. I fixed one of the bad references, but not the other one.
Right.
And so there was one more reference to the bad thing there.
So I can just resave the DDR right over the top of the old one and
yep,
back up and.
Yep. No, you would have to reopen it.
Okay.
Once it, so if I make a new window here and load this DDR, after that moment, when that little progress thing finishes going, it doesn't touch the file again. It's working entirely in RAM.
Okay.
So it will not notice.
So how do you reload it?
So one option would be just, double click that file. It'll open as if it was a new one. Or you can just, make a new window, open it right here. There is a function here that it turns out there's a couple of bugs in, but it may work for you. And that is this refresh.
Okay.
And what refresh does is it tries to save where you are in the hierarchy, goes back to the original file, reloads it, and then tries to put you back in the same spot.
Okay.
The problem is kind of like that UUID discussion that we had a while ago. There are some places in the pantheon of possible paths you can follow that can't be cleanly reproduced a second time. And so it will get partway and then stop.
So just so I'm sure I've got my head wrapped around this, once I pull in an XML file, I could actually delete that DDR XML.
Absolutely.
They'll have all the data is then contained in FMPerception.
Well, it's contained in FMPerception until FMPerception quits.
Okay.
Okay. FMPerception's save file format is the DDR.
Okay.
So if you quit or restart your machine, you just reopen the DDR again.
Okay.
It doesn't, there's no extended import process to retain that stuff, but it also means it doesn't retain between runs.
Okay.
That also means that if I go into scripts flat and reorganize all the columns and now want to get it back to where it was, just close the window, reopen it, and everything will be reset.
Got it.
It doesn't remember that reordering, but it's designed and optimized for give me the answer now, but don't break anything long term.
And Dave, could you tell me again how you said to print that my map looking graph?
Yeah, I would, let me go here. Oh, we're actually already on there. So here, and what you can do is you can do export under the file menu, export results HTML content, and then open it in a web browser.
Oh,
it's just HTML.
Okay, thank you. I missed that step. Okay, thank you.
It turns out that supporting printers is actually a humongous pain in the tail. And it gets even worse when you want to do it on Mac and Windows. And so I punted. I'm sorry. There's just, it was a bridge too far. So if you want to print that out, if you want to print out the report card to take it into a meeting with you or something like that, save it to HTML, open it in a browser, adjust the window to exactly whatever size you want it to be, and print it that way.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's-
don't beat yourself up, because just the fact that you gave us that ability is excellent. Thank you.
Hey, I would have loved to add printing support, but it was just too much. I'm sorry. And I didn't want to not release the software because it couldn't print. There was too much utility here. I mean, effectively what happened was I was a FileMaker developer for 20 years and I had some time and I built the system that I wanted. There are some developers that want the same kinds of things from a tool. There are other developers who don't. I love being in the FileMaker community because nobody has to use my tool. There are other tools out there. I've seen a lot of people use combinations. You know, you have that big migration project, and something like Inspector Pro or Base Elements is really good for planning and plotting that out. I'm a big fan of those products. I used them for years, but they don't do what this is optimized for, which is look at right now's DDR, give me the answer really quick, and let me get back to work.
No,
Hey,
that
Dave,
is quite good.
the one thing to note on the printing thing, even Claris doesn't have it right. They still have problems with the
Yeah.
Ventura stuff.
Yeah.
And so if Claris can't tackle it, and they've got as many employees as they do.
If a wholly owned subsidiary of Apple can't universally cleanly print on Apple devices, I'm not touching it. I'm not smarter than all of those people put together.
I have a different opinion on that one.
So anyway, this is it. FMPerception, it's basically designed to all be one screen. Just let you hunt through and find the stuff that you want. Let me go back to my slides real quick. Not that app, this app. And let's get down, say here. Yeah, let's go there. So there is a fully functional 14-day trial at fmperception.com. Run it on your DDR. Try it out. Make sure it works, it gets what you want done, and that it meets with your speed requirements. If you have any problems, I got to update that one. I think that'll still get there. I think support at Geist Interactive still works, but it would be support at proofgeist.com. You purchase FMPerception. This is purchase with support, not software rental or something like that. So you purchase licenses for the number of machines you need. You receive all updates in the next 12 months. And after 12 months, you can renew your support for half the total license cost to get another 12 months of updates. Or you can continue using the last version that was released before your support expired and continue using that. And I know developers who are using ones from years ago. I don't recommend it, but you totally can. This support includes everything that is released. So even major versions or anything like that, it's anything within 12 months. That also includes FMComparison, which is the next topic. But I did want to get to requirements. This was pushing the line at the beginning, but we've kept it there. So now these look like really low requirements. It's kind of nice. When we first released a number of years ago, some of that looked like, you know, we didn't support Windows XP and such. Discount code. Let's get this to everybody right now. This is 20% off. Probably work for the next few weeks. I don't know exactly when the expiration of this is. But it works on new purchases, and it should work on anything in the Proofgeist store software-wise. So if you wanted to pick up Auto or something like that, take a look there. But this will get you 20% off FMPerception. So before moving on to FMComparison, any questions? Anything?
So
We can always come back, but
I was going to ask, so I've dropped in on your office hours a couple of times. Is that a place that if I'm using FMPerception and I just want a little help in figuring out where to get what I need to get, is that a place that I can bring that
sure.
to? Okay.
Sure, absolutely. Every Thursday at 4 o'clock Eastern, we do a Zoom call, and it's FMPerception office hours. And just show up. It's very casual. There is rarely an agenda or a specific topic of presentation. We just start talking. If anybody's got specifically FMPerception or FMComparison questions, we tackle those first. But as Bev can tell you, we get off topic pretty far from time to time.
But it's fun.
It's a fun discussion. It's some smart people. I enjoy it. If you want to hang out or if you want to play with this stuff and you have questions that you want to tackle that way, I highly recommend getting yourself a single text file that you throw on your desktop, name it FMPerception questions. And every time you run into a weird thing, throw it in there, because too many times people get to the meeting and they had a question and they really want an answer and they can't remember what the question was. We'll also very often have somebody else taking over the presentation and showing their DDR in their system, and looking and analyzing and pointing things out and stuff like that. So if you want help looking at your DDR, it's a great place to come. Or if you need more immediate support, that support at proofgeist.com for licensing support, store support, things like that. They can handle tech support.
Dave,
Yes.
How far away do you think we are from being able to use the XML output from, I don't mean the XML DDR, I mean the save as XML.
I was waiting for that question to finish. It depends on what you want to use it for. The next thing I'm going to show you uses it.
Oh, okay.
So it is useful. Do you mean the new XML for FMPerception?
Right. Are you going to move FMPerception to it?
That is the plan. There are some technical difficulties that we hope to get resolved. Yes. I really like, in a lot of ways, I really like the new XML, but there's a couple little spots where it's driving me bananas. And if we can get those resolved, then yes, we'll be able to move over to it. Note that it's basically going to be a ground up rewrite. I'm not going to make the existing FMPerception work both ways. The development model that we came up with for FMComparison is faster, cleaner, and more consistent cross-platform. So that'll be the kind of approach that we use for what's currently codenamed FMPerception Next.
Okay.
But
okay, so you've gotten over the deficiencies in the XML DDR, the DDR issues that you've talked about for years. Most of them have been resolved.
The DDR issues, so the new XML is in general more complete.
Okay.
So for example, I do know about layout parts. I know about layout part styles. If I was using the new XML, I could tell you whether a layout part style was being used or not. That information is in the new XML. But yeah, there's just it's mostly related to the fact that there's no batch export for multi-file systems with the new XML. The save as XML is one file at a time, and that introduces some problems dealing with multi-file systems.
Sure. Okay.
We talked about that a bit earlier. We can talk about that further later.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's on the agenda, but we are not there yet. Cool.
Okay.
Well, then let's talk about FMComparison. So FMPerception has a diff tool built into it. It's right here. New DDR diff processor. I do not any longer recommend its use. It's sticking around for now because of people who have built tooling around it, but don't use it. Its primary flaw is that it looks at each changed property as the core unit of change. Every little modification is something to be notified about. Okay? You can't see the forest for the pine needles because it's just thousands upon thousands upon thousands of those. So if you take that layout that had 660 objects on it and grab all of those objects and move them 1 pixel to the right, FMPerception's built-in diff tool will give you 660 lines telling you that this was shifted 1 pixel to the right. It just spews that out. And there's no way to get a sense when you're looking at that for what's really going on in the system. And so we built an entirely new thing. This is included with your up-to-date FMPerception license. You can effectively think of it as a new feature of FMPerception. It just happens to be distributed in a separate app. It's an independent application, but it's part of the FMPerception suite. So let's take a look at that. So diffing. Diffing is not like with FMPerception, I can give you a quick demo and you get it. People get it really quick as to what it does, how it works, and then it's just a decision of whether it works the way you want it to work and whether it will meet your needs. But the thing is, FileMaker developers are not used to being able to do a diff. And so we don't think about our problems in terms of comparing 2 versions of a FileMaker system. And that's something that we can do now. And it's really disgustingly useful. It's more useful than I thought it was going to be when I wrote it. Once it got out in the wild, people were finding new ways to use it, and I love it. But we gotta talk a little bit. So why do you need a diff tool? And we honestly, at this point, I believe that we all need it and probably need to be using it fairly regularly. Handling version changes. So I love the data migration tool, but it's not going to move functionality. It just moves data. And so you're kind of using it to migrate functionality, but you can get your wires crossed there or end up missing something. If you're running teams, multiple developers, multiple shifts, dealing with junior devs, senior devs, bosses, if you need to justify the quantity of work that you're doing or how long it's taking, that kind of thing, it's really helpful to be able to generate an output of all the work that you've done and what has changed between 2 points in time. If you work in vertical market apps, you know, these people who make 50 copies of the exact same system for 50 different customers, and every single one of them gets tweaked just a teeny little bit. Well, but what changed? What is every single change that we made between the base version and customer XYZ's version? What's that stuff? Because when we release a new version, we're gonna have to redo all of that in their new version. How long does it take to find that? Are we going through notes? Are we running off of people's memory as to what we modified there? And one of my favorite uses is for confirming that no changes have been made. It's not about finding the changes. It's about finding that there aren't changes, which has its own value. Let's talk about two specific cases. I'm a big fan of this one. Talking to a developer in office hours, and they do a very dev test prod 3-server migration system. They're using Auto to move their data and data migration tools handling all of this stuff, and it's all fantastic. And so basically every week they do a push. And Friday night they do the push, and Monday morning everybody shows up and starts using the system, and we get bugs. We get bug reports. But the thing is, they're giving me bug reports on things that have been working for the last 2 years. So somebody, somewhere in the last week, changed something that broke the feature that emails out invoices. How long is it going to take me to find out why that isn't working? And so what this developer does is Monday morning, they bring up FMComparison with the previous week's version and this week's version, and there's only 40 scripts that were changed. So they say it's the invoice thing. Let me filter the edited scripts list for invoice. Yeah, okay, this script. And then you can actually look in there and see that even though it's a 150-line script, we only changed 2 lines. Now, how long is it going to take you to fix that bug that you just introduced? A big productivity boost, particularly if you're doing migrations. There's also those live changes on the production system. So we've got, and these version numbers are rough, but we've got a version on production. We've got a more recent version in testing right now. And then we're working on a really recent version that's not going to see the light of day for a couple of weeks, and that's in development. And so we're getting ready to push the 2.0 from test into prod, okay? The problem is that after we pushed 1.0, somebody modified prod. Now, it happens all the time. We do it, it's hot fixes. We've all done it. We code live on the server when it's critically required, sometimes all the time, and that's okay. But if that change has been made there, if I push that 2.0 version, I am not accounting for those 0.1 modifications. So when I do the push, I export the XML. And so I have the XML for 1.0. And now before I push 2, I can run the XML for the live system again and see if anything has changed in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 months on that production server. Has anything changed functionally in that FileMaker system? And if it has, I can make those changes back in test before pushing test and promoting it. Does that make sense? And
I can't count the number of times I've overwritten live hot fixes when I've updated a development version, from a version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a universal problem. Whether you're using Auto or the data migration tool or doing it manually, we've all done this.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever done a promotion or a migration, you've screwed it up. I'll put the numbers at about 100%. You messed it up at some point. But this is where you get into that confirming that no changes happened. If FMComparison tells you that there's no change between that 1.0 and the current live, I know I can push tests safely. I don't think I can push tests safely. I have determined that I can push tests safely, which is a huge boost to confidence, relaxation, all that kind of stuff. I'm not depending upon anybody's memory for what got touched. I don't have to go look at help desk tickets that were closed in the last week to see if any of them were in production. I can find out the answer
at night.
Yes. And now that Friday night live promotion can go on and I can just sleep all weekend. Now, I may still have broken things, but it's going to be back in this area with the regressions. But that's just a normal bug, not overwriting a hotfix. So yes, there's a diff tool in FMPerception, very, very verbose. Please don't use it. Please use FMComparison. And let me show it to you. So I flipped past the slide a little quick, and we mentioned it earlier, but FMComparison uses the new XML. This is the save a copy as XML from FileMaker, not the DDR. It doesn't know how to read DDRs. Okay, so I can run FMComparison, and this is what comes up. And the first thing we have to do is select two XML files. So I can select a baseline file, and then I've got a variant file, and it's already loading the XML for those two. I got a bunch of configuration options that I can set, but I'll come back to those later. And I come here and I can say run the comparison. It's compared. What's the results? Okay. On the left-hand side, we've got all of our major categories, and this is the number of added things, the number of deleted things, and the number of modified things. There's the count. So if I want to see, okay, what happened with the table occurrences? We edited these table occurrences, something got modified. Well, okay, the modification count went from 26 to 28, and nothing else is showing up as modified. It may well be that somebody changed it and changed it back. They changed it out to 27 and then changed it back to, on 28. But Todd did all of it, so we know that, because that's one of the things that's in the new XML is who last touched this thing. Please note, it's who last touched this thing. We have no information right here on who made modification number 27 to that table occurrence. Does that make sense? There's no logging here. Previously, Todd had touched it. Most recently, Todd had touched it. But I don't know who touched it in the middle. It may have been Todd, may not have been. It's a thing to be aware of if you want to try and use this to blame somebody for a screw up. Make sure you know exactly what's happening there. So, for example, let's look at this.
Does that require the field, Dave?
Does
Do
what require the field?
Do those require that you have those modification fields in
No.
place, or does it
No.
get it out of those?
It's in the new XML.
Okay. So
Yep.
regardless of whether you have those fields, your modification account name
Nope.
field. Okay.
This is all metadata. There's no table data in here.
Okay.
Okay. This is think of it as a different form of the DDR, because it basically is a different form of the DDR. So you don't have to put special fields in to be able to use FMPerception. You just need to have that XML. And so, yeah, so here was modification count 2 to modification count 3, a field comment was added. And I know when the time was that occurred. Now, I can tell where the changes were occurring, the scale of those changes, and there's some other fun stuff that's in the new XML that wasn't in the DDR. And one of those things that we didn't have in the DDR was the actual placement of the table occurrences on the graph. I had the names of the table occurrences and I knew what table they were based off of, but I had no idea where they were. Is this one further to the left, further to the right? There was no Cartesian coordinates in the old XML, but there is in the new XML. And this lets me actually redraw your relationship graph and show you the changes visually. This is what the graph looks like in these systems. And I can highlight changes. Here's our new table occurrences that got added. Now, the other nice thing about this organization is it allows you to not care about things. If you're the kind of developer who doesn't care if all the table occurrences on the graph got reorganized, don't look. if you capture the table occurrence changes and the relationship changes, you will have captured the functional stuff. The changes that are highlighted here are just visual. If you're going to distribute this thing to other developers, maybe you want to clean that up, but otherwise, I don't care. You know, if somebody was making modifications to privilege sets, but this isn't that kind of change, you know, I'm not worried about bugs here. I'm worried about bugs here. Show me what happened in this script. Looks like is it just a name thing? That's another one of those double changes things. Let's see if we can find a good one here. Here you go. A comment got added on this script. No functional change. Perfect. There you go. Set variable got pulled out. Set variable got put in. Another one got pulled out. So look at this. This is sorry, I've got the Zoom UI getting in my way. We've got 289 step scripts. How long do you want to spend comparing those two to figure out what actually changed? And one of the nice things here is I'm actually capturing all of the properties in those script steps, not just the ones that FileMaker would normally show you in a visual version of that. So if it's one of those ones where you got to go 3 dialogues deep to see that setting, it's surfaced here. And I can show you if it changed, as opposed to looking at 2 versions of the script and the FileMaker summary of what the script step says isn't showing any changes. It's because the change occurred someplace that they're not showing you. So yeah.
This looks a lot like Winfried's tool. I mean, it's got more, but I mean, looks like you were inspired by it.
No, I actually never saw his tool.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Used to use it all the time.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Oh, so here's another example of that, things I don't care about. Here are new scripts, deleted scripts, and edited scripts. But scripts that were moved around, so this new work folder got deleted, and all of these scripts got sent to the end of the list in another folder now called logging. But I mean, that's a change. It's a real change. But if that's not where my bug is, so I don't care. I don't have to look at it, and all of this noise goes away. The old system would have treated this as important as these changes. And that's not necessarily true. And so slicing these things up into these nice granular chunks and separating out organization changes from functionality changes just lets you focus on the information that you really care about. Let me show you that advanced configuration. I apologize. I don't know if the chat is people asking me questions. I don't actually have it up right now. So if somebody's got a question, call out or something.
Yeah, no questions.
Okay, good. I'm fine with side channel communication. That's cool. Just so there's 3 different categories here of things that you can modify to tweak this. The categories list is basically that section on the side. So it's this stuff over here. So let's say that you're sitting down and doing a code review with a junior developer, and you don't want to, they weren't touching fields, they were touching scripts. I can actually turn all of this off except for scripts, and it will hide all of the other categories. So also good when you're talking to a customer and you don't want them looking at the stuff that you had to do to accounts and value lists to make this work. You know, they don't care that you changed a custom function. They care about layouts, scripts, and tables. You know, make the relationship graph go away, keep the tables and fields, keep the scripts, keep the layouts. and you can just get the diff for those sections of the system. So fun part number 1. Fun part number 2, relevant changes. This came out of discussions with developers while this was in development, and we found that developers' needs for this tool fell into a spectrum defined by 2 points. This point is, I need to know if anything got touched or changed. I don't care how small it is. I'm managing a junior developer and I want to make sure that they aren't in there digging around in things that they're not supposed to. Because one of them has a problem with a junior developer who likes playing around and changing things and then changing things back. And so we get this bug report that's saying this doesn't work, but it now works. And we can actually look at the diff and go, yeah, because Bob changed it and changed it back before somebody noticed, but nobody saw it. The other end of the spectrum is, I'm chasing down bugs right now. Don't tell me about little piddly stuff. I only want to know about functional changes. And so that's what this relevant changes section is about. As we saw on a couple of those things that I clicked on, where really all that had changed was like modification count and maybe the timestamp, you can say, ignore those. Still show them to me, but a change in the modification count, timestamp, user, or account is not enough for me to care. I need a functional change. Okay. If all they did was add script comments or edit a script comment, I don't care. It's not a functional change. If we added some white space, don't tell me the script changed, because it didn't. Not really. One developer, yes, that's a change I want to know about. Somebody was modifying that script. Other developer, no, it has no functional impact on the behavior of this system. Don't tell me about it. And so that's what all of these checkboxes are for, is being able to say, technically adding or removing breakpoints edits the script. So do you want to know? Is that a big enough change that you want to be notified? Nope, thanks. So basically, if you turn all this stuff off, you get down to functional changes. Relationship drag direction is a fun one. In the XML, FileMaker calls it the left TO and the right TO, but it's actually wrong. It's TO you dragged from and TO you dragged to. Which means that if I was rebuilding a relationship graph, I might draw the opposite direction from somebody who had done it previously. And it's the exact same relationship with the exact same functionality. It's just that the left and right have been swapped. No impact on functionality to the system. But if I want to be notified if that junior developer was breaking relationships and rebuilding them, that might get caught by this. Or I just finished doing a bunch of rebuilding stuff. Please take all that noise out of the report. That's not a change I care about. Only tell me if the actual definition of the relationship is functionally different. This one is the most recently added one with a developer who they had the diff tool. They loved the diff tool, but every time a diff was shown in the diff tool, they had to justify it with documentation. And because the diff tool said, the next serial number for this field will be XYZ123, they had to justify why that had changed. So there's a 1.5-page document that just says users created records in the database and therefore that number changed. And they had to do that every time they did a migration. So we added this one. So you can say, yeah, if the next serial number is the only thing that changed, don't tell me about it, because that's not functional. It's just whatever the next number is going to be. Normal use of the system by people without edit access will change this value. Don't tell me about it. And then there's the linking rules. And if you really want to know more about this stuff, this is really more of an office hours discussion topic because it gets very weird and very technical. But in general, it has to do with the rules that FMComparison uses to look at two copies of a system and line up and say, this field is this field, even though the name of the field has changed. And so if you are just doing version 1, and then we make version 2 from that, and version 3 from that, and version 4 from that, sequential is the way you want to go. Branched is for those people who are doing that vertical market stuff, where we're not comparing the baseline version with what we did for the customer modifications. That would be sequential. But we've actually got two leaves. You know, this is for the situation where at some point in the past, the system split, and I now need to find out what the differences are between these two systems, and I don't have the common ancestor to use in the comparison. And so that's when you would move to branched. And then disconnected is for things like, hey, there's a new version of some FileMaker feature toolkit that someone released, and I've implemented their toolkit in my system, and I need to compare these two systems that have some similar code but are in general wildly different. Try and connect these things up to see if there's anything you can flag. So that's what disconnected is for. They're basically two files that have never been together but might still share common code. And then if you're really weird, you can get into custom, and I'm not going further into that. But there is custom control for that stuff. So that is FMComparison. The cool part here is once you actually get what we're talking about and what you can use it for, the system is actually pretty darn simple to work with. There's not much to do here. You feed it two systems, you tell it to compare, and it spits them out. And the interface is pretty consistent. I brought in another developer, another longtime FileMaker hand, to help with the JavaScript in the UI work for FMComparison. And it was, during the creation process, I don't necessarily work well with other people trying to steer my creation. In the long run, it was immensely helpful. Joe did fantastic work in making FMComparison look and feel the way that it does. I'm really pleased with the way this came out. Now, as I mentioned before, FMComparison is not separately purchasable. It's part of the FMPerception suite. So if you want this, buy FMPerception, you get this for free. And we've already talked about discount codes and things like that.
Do an example of show me just the changes, which is what I like.
Okay. Let's make a new window. Let's go the same two XML files. Make sure all the categories are turned on. Let's turn all of these off. And if I wanted to do it quickly, I could save this as my user-defined set. And now I could always toggle between application default and user-defined. I've just defined what user-defined means now. So you could set it up to be just the settings that you want and always run with those. Leave the linking rules where they are because this is a sequential one. And so let's run the comparison. You can see that 8 of the objects, 8 of the fields are no longer showing up as modified. Same number of creations and deletions, which makes a certain amount of sense. A creation or a deletion is always going to qualify. It's really, this is the column that you're controlling, is when one of these isn't big enough. All my table occurrence changes were too small. Scripts, 22 of the scripts dropped off the list where the changes made were just not substantive enough. Yeah, you get the entire UI appears the same. It's just a less noisy version. If you have a window here, you come back tomorrow and this window is still open and you can't remember what settings were used, the settings are here under this comparison metadata tab. This is what all those settings were when you said run it. It's not modifiable now, but it's here for reference. We've also now got JSON export. We are working on CSV export. So if you want to build tooling around this, you can, where you can say, okay, for my migration purposes, I need to see these particular kinds of changes. You know, show me only calculation fields where the calculation definition changed. FMComparison doesn't have filtering that can get you that far, but you can dump the data out, pull it into FileMaker, and do whatever additional filtering you want to do. That's available as an option if you want to, or if you want to feed it into something else. What else we got? I think I've sufficiently broken everybody's brain. That was a lot.
No, I'm just thinking of all the different ways I can use that. That's great.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll say about FMComparison is, you know, with FMPerception, we got used to exporting the XML when we need it. With FMComparison, you need to get used to exporting the XML at important moments in the solution's history and retaining them. You never know when you're going to need to compare last September to last October. Now, here's the cool part. The new XML is bigger. It takes up more space. One of the things, let me see if I can find an example here. One of the things that is in the new XML that was not in the old XML is, let's see if I can open this up. Desktop. It's a lovely feature for everybody but me. Is FMComparison remembers the paths for the two separate files independently. So I just navigated to a particular place and now I have to navigate there again. And nobody else runs into that problem but me. And this one. The new XML has things like the images. So we actually diff the images. You know, so these icons, image graphics that appear on layouts, if you have an icon in the corner of a layout that's just stuck on the layout, that's layout metadata. Cool part, even if the object didn't change size, I'll flag for you that the content of that image changed if it did, which is really nice. However, if you have that icon in the corner of every layout, the new XML doesn't make a reference to that image. It spits out the image every single time. So if it's an image-heavy system, that new XML can get very big. Here's the cool part. XML compresses exceptionally well. If you just do, from the desktop, a zip of a folder full of FileMaker XML, you will get 90+% compression. Okay, it compresses outstandingly well. I really like it for long-term storage. Go ahead and zip these things up and, I mean, spit these things out once a week and save 20 of them. And just hold on to them for a while, because the zips don't take up much space. 20 of them will take up as much space as 2 uncompressed ones if they're zipped.
Speaking of that, Dave,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a noob question here, or it's just something I don't have a need until I have your product, and that is there a way for the server to do a nightly DDR, you know, and save it with a specific file name? Is that a possibility? So I can have a nightly DDR that just sits on the server? Is
The
that a possibility?
the DDR, no. The DDR export functionality is just in the FileMaker client. If you want to automate it, you'd have to set up a robot FileMaker
Oh,
machine.
okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Bev or anybody else can help me. Did save a copy as XML, make it into server?
Yeah, but you still run into one file, one.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you can do the new XML and have that automatically export at the server level as a scheduled script.
And again, what is
because
the negative of that? You said it a
you
moment
can't
ago.
use it with FMPerception. It's only
Oh,
useful
right,
with
right.
FMComparison.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
Oh, but that's still useful.
oh yes, it is. It's just very often they kind of want to work together. I really want to get to FMPerception next, so we can just automatically export the XML and it will support all the stuff. But it's this one, the save a copy as XML. There is a script step for doing that. So you can write yourself a script that will export the XML for your entire system to one particular named folder, timestamp the folder, whatever like that.
Well, I can
Totally
see
works.
that helpful, in bug reporting for somebody on a Thursday calls and says there's a problem, and I have now 2 copies that I can look at very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
The word I was
immensely
thinking
helpful.
of when you were talking about saving these in advance is you save them at milestones. So you would save your various versions at milestones when you finish a development run. And
I would certainly get in the habit of doing that. Even if you're not ready to start using this software, you can never start generating the data too early.
Mm-hmm.
And the smaller the time slices, the less noise there is.
Mm-hmm.
okay.
So, and the other thing is that there are because it can process the data quickly enough, there are all sorts of tiers of milestones. So let's say, like you used to do with Fort Wayne Metals, you come out for 2 days. Well, show up on day 1, export the XML, and before you leave on day 2, export the XML. And now you've got everything that changed while you were in the building. Now, 3 days later, they come back and say, hey, there's a bug in what you did. You hop in, you export that XML, and you can point out that that bug was introduced by them after you left.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the XML at the moment that you stopped messing with it.
That would have been great.
Right.
Yeah. That's what Josh uses a lot.
So
for
the
his
more
developers.
you do with it, the more of these files you want to have around. Now, I don't think that FMComparison makes you want to export the XML quite as often as FMPerception. With FMPerception, I want it every 20 minutes. With FMComparison, I need it once a day, probably max. Though from time to time, I'll do 2 or 3 exports at once just to do a quick set of comparisons because I have the files and they're live. But once the file is modified, I can't generate the old XML unless I have a backup of the old file.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got these files that they're constantly changing, you can snap off the XML at any moment. So
And it's a lot smaller than a backup.
that depends. You could have a file with lots of images on the layouts, but very few records, and the XML would be bigger than the backup.
Okay.
And
because
Beverly,
it's doing base 64 encoded versions of all the images.
Yeah.
yeah, and Beverly, that nightly thing that I want to do, will it let me name the export file like today's date, timestamp, whatever? Do you
Well,
know?
a lot of people will put it to a named folder with a timestamp. So your files are exactly the same
Oh, yeah.
name,
Oh, okay.
but you're pulling it from a folder that's timestamped.
That's just as
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
basically it uses the same file reference stuff that all the other exports do. The thing that is weirdest about it is that it doesn't target a file. It targets a window. So you point it at a window of your system and say, export this to this XML file. So if you are doing a lot of work in your system with renaming windows and things like that, it can be challenging to set up a script that will do the export.
Oh,
It
So-
it takes a weird aberration to it. If when your database opens and all the files open and all the window names match the file names, no problem. Don't worry about it. Just target those file names without the extension and you're done.
That's one of the reasons I keep that first table that's created. I don't necessarily create new fields or do anything other than I have a layout that's named the same as the file.
Okay.
And it's pretty consistent.
Okay.
hmm.
So you've got the file name stored in the file.
When you
Yeah.
first create a file, that's what it does. It
Yeah.
gives you a table and a layout that's named whatever that new file is. So yeah.
So,
Yeah.
The question I had has been answered really, because I was wondering, you can't save a copy as on a hosted file, but you can do that with the script step. Is that safe to do on a live file that people are in, or is that have to be done?
You
Like, do
you
you
can
need to-
totally do it on a live system. I think there was a version where it was a problem, but that was back in like 19.0.4 or something. So yeah, it's safe to do from there. You can do it from a hosted file as a server-side script, as we were just discussing, using the script step and a scheduled script, or you can do it from a client that is connected to the server. If you've got a really big system, you will see a performance advantage from running it locally.
Okay.
The developer I was talking about before, who uses this a lot as part of his backup routine, he's got a backup routine that builds clones. And so he will grab the clones off the server and run them on his and run the XML on his local machine. And so the network's completely pulled out of that. He's got a snap off of the files with the snap off of the XML at that point that he can use for reference.
Yeah.
But that's his process. But we're talking about a system that is 80 files and his XML is the new XML is 3.5 gigabytes for all 80 files. His old XML is, so his DDR is like 2.5 gigabytes.
Wow.
It's one of the biggest DDRs I've ever run into. I've seen a couple of bigger single files than his biggest file, but I haven't seen a complete system that was bigger than that. But it probably exists somewhere.
Oh,
So, and
you
this
talk to John Howell about his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this obviously then it has nothing to do with records. So yeah, you mentioned you run it on the clone. So okay.
It's just system metadata. The closest thing that you get to that is if there's auto entry serial numbers. That's the closest thing to data that FMComparison can tell you about. So it is not comparing data states. It is comparing metadata system level states, which is why we don't need the fields to be in the table for doing the comparison, because we're not comparing table data. We're comparing data about the table, not the table itself. These fields.
Which one of them tells you the number of records at that point in time?
That's in the DDR, but I don't believe it's in the new XML.
Yeah, I thought.
If it was, it would be. Yeah, I don't think it's there. There's a couple of things that were in the DDR that would be nice to have over here, and there's some extra stuff that I'm pushing for when we get to analysis. But yeah, it's not there. So they've done a lot of work actually recently on removing things from the XML that would cause the files to change when nothing has happened. For example, the XML used to be timestamped in the header of the XML, and they removed that timestamp because you could have a system and export the XML, and 5 seconds later export it again, and nobody's made any records, nothing in the entire system has changed, but the files no longer match. So at some point, somebody complained about that loudly enough that Claris adjusted how that works. And so we don't have timestamps for the export in the file. We have timestamps for the modifications, and only the last modification. So that's the other thing when you're dealing with, if you're snapping these things off too far apart, if you're doing it quarterly and saving those, you're going to see a script that got changed 80 times, and you're not going to have any idea who made any of those changes. You would have to start slicing down into that to find who made this particular change, because it would take 30 different exports to be able to find the answer to that. And we don't have that right now.
So let me kind of map out a scenario.
Yeah.
So basically, I do regular data migration updates to a system that I work on. So what I would do is, before I run the data migration, I would save an XML, and then I would want to save an XML. And then once it goes up there, then before I make the next migration, I can save an XML of the hosted file and compare it to what it looked like when that way I can find those hot fixes that we were talking about and see, oh yeah, what did I fix and what hot fixes did I forget to put in the development version? So
I think in general, you can basically do it with one export after the first migration. So you take whatever is live right now, do the XML export. You migrate in new stuff, do an export at the end of the migration. That's the new state versus what it was right before the migration. That is now your baseline for comparing to your no, I was wrong. There's 2 exports. So then the next week, before you do the migration, you export and compare to see if there were hot changes.
Oh yeah.
And then you do whatever you got to do, and then you do the migration, and you have another export that is what it is right now that it is live again.
Yeah. And
then do an export before, check for hot fixes, do an export after, and you use that one for doing your bug reports. And you don't compare that. You could literally compare that to the previous or 1 week ago's live, depending upon whether you wanted to include the hot fixes in that or not.
Yeah.
In the last week, these are all the changes, or here are the changes that have happened since the hot fixes. It's a question of what you're trying to capture. But I think one before and one after.
I'm kind of wondering too, like if you, so of course, when I do the hot fixes, then the key is I remember I've got to open up the development version and make sure I replicate those hot fixes in the development version. Does that flag as being, so I could make the identical changes in both files, but does it flag as a change? And
that is where you will get these UUID and ID changes. Okay, so if you're making the exact same change, you've got a field with the exact same name with the exact same definition.
Yeah.
But the ID has changed and the UUID has changed because those were assigned at that time. Those will flag as changes if these are turned on.
Okay.
If these are turned off, those won't flag because those were independent.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's also the fact that you'll get an error message, a warning, if you feed the files in the wrong order between baseline and variant. It will tell you that the creation date of this file is swapped, but you can actually use this intentionally to create a migration path backwards. So let's say that I added a bunch of functionality to a system, and now it turns out that system doesn't need that, and I have to rip it all back out. I can do the diff in reverse And it's telling me I need to delete these fields and delete these scripts and change these scripts back to this way, which is just removing all of the changes that I had made. If you go the other way, I have to see what it's saying is these are the things that you added that you now have to take out.
Yeah.
It's the exact same diff. It's just the direction of the vector. And so, A, if you understand that, it removes some of the stress about picking these in the right order. But B, you do need to understand that this is a vectored event. It goes from here to here. This is what the changes are and how we are enumerating them. So that's probably the single largest point of confusion that people have had. It's also why we've got this legend screen, because plus, minus, and oh, that's the wrong symbol.
Oh no.
Ah, Joe. Correct out here. It's the triangle. Greek delta
Yeah.
change. Technically, they should be yellow, but we couldn't find a yellow that looked good and produced readable text.
Mhm.
So
Yellow
went with
sucks
blue.
on white unless you make it brown.
And there's
You
a
can't
dark,
see
and
it.
there is a dark mode.
There is a dark mode. Yes.
Yeah. Dave, you said that that the export XML, save as XML, is a one file at a time
Uh-huh.
thing. So can you speak to, if I've got a multi-file solution, how would you approach that?
You're going to have to do the comparisons individually right now.
Okay.
It's on the agenda for a future thing, is to build kind of a wrapper to this that can take two multi-file exports, link them up, and then do those comparisons.
So any external references would be difficult to follow up on and stuff like that.
That introduces a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's not so much the external references, because like, even though it's an external reference, the field name is still copied over. But it's things like, because the field name is copied over in the XML, if I rename the field in the data file, that will appear as an edit in the UI file, even though nobody changed anything in the UI file.
Yeah.
FileMaker updated it when I changed the name of the field in the data file. Every reference to that field gets updated. I'm working on it. That's a really, really big relevant changes checkbox. Is taking those out.
But I'd want to know that, because if I'm using this data for data API or for web or anything where I'm making calls to that, and there is a reference that is changed, even though I'm calling it from the UI file, I need to know that that name is changed.
But that is one point on that spectrum. The opposite end of the spectrum is I am trying to reproduce the changes that were made in live hotfixes. Only tell me about the things that I have to modify. And that should show up as one field edit, not an edit to the layouts that reference that field and an edit to the scripts that reference that field. But that's the two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so we've got to be able to do both.
So your backups, your export script would just be a list of calling the different files with an internal script that does the export?
Yeah.
This is the save as? Okay.
Yeah. Just call each of the windows one after another. Whether you want to pass it as a parameter or just make a 10-line script that makes the folder and then does 9 exports.
Okay, so they all have to be open. Because you said window.
Okay. I don't know for sure how that interacts with the server-side script stuff. These
Oh,
are the same
yeah.
questions that I have. And unfortunately, at this point, I've gotten so into tooling that I'm not supporting FileMaker servers myself anymore. So I have to ask developers what happens in those situations. Josh Ormond has been working on a script that will kind of do a DDR export, but it runs into problems with two windows, a system where there are two files with different names, but they produce windows with the exact same name, or the same file on multiple servers. And FileMaker will keep track of those, but there's no way to get the export to export cleanly. It's kind of a pain.
So why did they do that and not just let you address the files?
That is a fascinating question, and I have no earthly idea.
Okay.
There may have been a very good reason. It's part of me thinks it's so aberrant. It's so different from the way that they usually tackle those problems that my brain says there has to have been a good reason. I just don't know what it is.
So we just have to make sure that we don't have any duplicate window names.
Yeah. It helps. I mean, it's just a question of how your system works. If your system is using duplicate window names, like you change the names of all the windows so it's always the same, so the user never notices when one window swaps out for another one or something like that. Or if you are, constantly spawning windows with custom named titles, so you're renaming the windows all the time. When you click on an invoice, it opens up a new window with the invoice number in the window title, that kind of thing. You can end up in a state where it's hard to address those windows. And in that case, writing your script will be harder. If all of your windows match the file names and none of those collide, your script will be simpler.
Now these have to be windows that are open at
Again,
that
so
time.
when it's running on the client,
like when you do it you do it from the client. So
yeah.
those windows all have to be open. And the idea is to have them be on the default window, the default layout.
Well,
Actually, no, the layout doesn't matter. So it's just the name of the window for that file.
Yes.
Okay.
So it has to be open. So here's really where the big difference is. And this is one of the problems with the new XML over the DDR is if I have a single file open on my FileMaker system and I go to run the DDR and that file talks to other files that had not yet been opened, FileMaker will open those files and include that XML in the DDR. It automatically builds the largest lasso loop it can to encapsulate as many files as possible. There is no automatic functionality like that in the new export. You have to know your system. You have to know which files you need to export. The DDR will hunt for files for you to export. So for example, if one of the scripts calls a script in another file, and that's the only reference to this other file is in this one perform script step, opening the file doesn't open the second file. It's only running the script that opens the second file. So it doesn't open the whole thing. So the good news is we have a script step. Like I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. It's a great step forward is having a script step that is server-side compatible. It's just not my perfect script step, and I wish they would tweak it a little, but it's still dramatically better than what we had before in most ways. Best I got.
Surely does the documentation have anything on what happens when you run it on the server?
I don't know. Why don't you find out and tell the class?
I'll look that up. Good idea. Good idea.
Well, Dave, I've got a trivia question for you.
Okay.
Can you describe what's on your dock? The special apps that you have on the right there. Some of them I don't recognize.
Oh, you're talking up here?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
there
Control
anything-
center, battery, Bluetooth, headphones. Yeah, it's just the sound control panel.
It's these next ones I'm interested.
Wi-Fi. Oh, gotcha. This is iStat menus,
Hmm.
I think. Okay, so this is CPU load per core,
Mhm.
which is fun because this is one of those M1 Maxes. So it shows lots of little lines, and you can click on it and get history. And then this is memory pressure. So it's used and free in my RAM. So am I consuming all of my memory? And I can actually look to see for like memory leaks and things like that if the RAM consumption just keeps going up and up and up and up. This is upload download.
Mhm.
And one of the nice things is that this software has a lot of options on how you want to display that. I could do this as bar charts or graphs or whatever. It's got like a dozen different options for every single one of these, and I'm only using a third of the things that this thing offers. I
Mhm.
picked the ones that I care about. And this is a temperature sensor.
Yeah.
I always love this one because this is every single temperature sensor that's inside the computer. This laptop has a lot of temperature sensors in it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Neither did I until I started looking at this software and seeing how much heat diagnostics they're doing in order to keep track of things. But I'm just fascinated with how relatively cool the machine stays.
Mhm.
There's some stuff in there that gets up to 130, 133, but and this is drives.
Oh yeah.
So this is read and write at the drive level. I got in the habit of having this back in the day of spinning drives
Mhm.
because particularly in like Mac OS 9, but I think in 10 it also did some of this, where if it had to access a spinning drive that had spun down, it would have to spin it back up and you could end up freezing your machine while that was happening. And so I liked seeing a little red light pop up where it was trying to read and I was waiting for the drive. And so it was just a quick place that I could glance to see if the slowdown that I am experiencing in this particular moment is drive related. At this point, honestly, it's cool blinking lights for a really fast SSD. It's
Nice.
way less of a problem now
Mhm. All right.
than it
Well,
used to
thank
be.
you. That's fun.
But yeah, I think that's iStat menus. That's just the activity monitor.
Oh, I didn't know you could stick the activity monitor up there.
Well, it's part of iStat menus. I just click it right there. It's also got the console. What is this? So crash reports and logs, console,
Oh,
and
I see. So it's referencing. Yeah.
what was that one?
That
I don't know.
should've
But
been
yeah, here's
there.
iStat menus. So I can
yeah.
turn on and off. They've got their own clock. So if you want way more control of what displays here, you make Apple hide their clock and you can put up exactly how you want the time display to occur. So I can go here. So the kind of layout that I want, whether it should show little calendar event things. I don't need my calendar in my menu bar. But if I did, week format, was it the Europe stuff does Monday to Sunday, I think, or something like that?
I don't know.
First day of the week, how is your rotation? It'll just change the calendar bit to display there. Oh yeah, I need cycles of the moon, please.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was fun.
Really cool little piece of software.
We do here because we have moon bows.
Oh, that's true.
So yeah.
That's right. Will, may I give my report back to the class?
Oh yes.
The documentation is Claris documentation, which means it's of relatively limited use. So it doesn't actually say. It just says that it's server compatible. It says save a copy of the open file whose window name is whatever you've asked for, and they show a sample. So I guess what you have to do is open the file and name a virtual window.
Yeah, probably. I'd probably just run with it and say open the file, and it would help if you just knew what the name of that window was going to be.
Yeah. Probably
There's also
that's
the
what
fact that FileMaker will, if two files are going to pop up with the same name, FileMaker will auto rename the windows unless you change them back. So again, it can make targeting weird in really complex systems.
Yeah.
My sense is, unless you really want to spend a bunch of time busting your tail, I'd do it the long way. Hard code it and just grind it out.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a, it's open, export, open, export, open, export, open, export, and then that will work. You open the file that you needed and it was there. Now, the other one you got to watch out for is with those opens. Actually, that's what you do. At the beginning, you need to open all of the files. Because when you do those opens, they're on open scripts run.
Yeah.
And that could activate a different window. So you can end up not quite where you thought you were going to be.
Yeah.
So Josh's version tries to read the list of all the open windows and backwards work from that so that it can be one loop that'll just run on whatever is open. And the point is, it's not working all that well yet. It works pretty well, just not great.
You could probably have, if I'm on the server, then I'm going to open up as this window name.
You could probably do that too.
Yeah. And then just have it be the name of the file.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give it a shot, see how it works. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay.
Wow. I've gotten to the end of that time. Any further questions?
That was great.
I will stop sharing.
Yeah,
Thank you,
that was
Dave.
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
That was really great. That, we know it's a good session when we go overtime and everything. So
Yeah.
I'm over here trying it. We were talking about hot fixes. I'm trying to put in a hot fix while we're talking and everything. But yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming out and doing this presentation. I'll have the upload to the YouTube channel here probably later this afternoon. So
The only other thing I'll say
Cool.
is while your 2-week trial of FMPerception is going on, you can also use FMComparison. They use the same trial period, and you can only start that trial. Nope, I lied. There was a time when you could only start that trial from FMPerception. Now you can start it from either of them, but it is the same trial. So it's not like you get 2 weeks for one and then 2 weeks for the other.
right.
It's
Yeah, I caught
one
on to that
2-week
pretty
period
much.
with the suite.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna mess around with it. I also wanted to say I really appreciate the licensing model too, because everything nowadays is annual, and if you stop paying for it, you lose it. And I really appreciate the fact that if I'm not using it for a while, and it lapses, or I decide not to renew for the next year, I still get to use it. It's
Mhm.
yeah, I appreciate that model. So
Yeah. Well, you could do
Just
that
not
with
getting the new
FileMaker.
features.
You
Yeah.
could still, they still will sell you full versions that
Yeah.
don't expire of FileMaker.
yeah, but there is very few else out there anymore that
Yeah.
provides a one-time purchase. Everything is annual, and it's like, man, by the time the end of the year comes around, you've racked up all these annual fees that are going to run again. Keeping track of that gets a little crazy.
I like the monthlies with Adobe. So I'll just turn it on for a month when I need to use it, and then turn it off.
All All right.
Yep.
Well, we'll go ahead and sign off and I'll stop the recording. Jonathan.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
All right.